if we're going to try to treat a child with a new drug that targets gene X, we're going to want to know, does the tumor tissue express gene X? And so what I do, I direct the lab in the trials core to actually take sections, very thin sections of the tumor tissue, stain it with an antibody or stain it with a marker to see if, in fact, is gene X prominently expressed by those tumor cells. Another very important thing that we do is when the child is taking a certain drug to interfere with, say, pathway X again, we can actually take a small sample of blood from that child's arm or from their port and spin down those blood cells and then analyze those blood cells to see if the drug in the blood is actually inhibiting pathway X. And that gives us a good clue. One thing is as far as dosing of a drug, are we giving enough drug to inhibit that pathway? But then also we can understand how much might be getting into the blood-brain barrier and getting into the tumor base. So the tumor is within the blood-brain barrier, and one of the challenges that we have is getting drug across the blood-brain barrier so we have a high enough concentration of drug in the blood in the tumor. Because one of the challenges of treating a child with brain tumor is that it's very hard to get drug into the brain, and the drug does not diffuse very well into the brain because the brain is protected by the blood-brain barrier. Mm-hmm. So that's a large challenge in treating children. Mm-hmm. with brain
and that's
tumors.
why you didn't have to resort to the radiation.
Well, radiation is another modality that we use to kill tumor cells. Unfortunately, though, all the modalities that we currently are using to treat brain tumors also kill normal cells. And so if you have a small child that's 2 or 3 years old, their brains are rapidly developing. It's the most rapid time of brain development. And many of these therapies harm the division of those normal cells.
Let's talk about the Genome Project. I mean, this is exciting stuff.
It is really exciting. Yeah, actually, that's a phenomenal approach. So St. Jude, in collaboration with another institution and also the National Cancer Institute, we are sequencing the genome of 600 children. So we're looking at their regular DNA in all the cells in their body, because that's similar, and then we're looking and comparing it to the DNA and the genome, the gene code in the tumor cells, and we're trying to find out what's different in the tumor cells that's not that way in the normal cells in the body. And then we're able to group those tumors with certain mutations or certain genetic errors together, and then we're able to figure out which type of drug might be most successful at targeting that genetic error or attacking cells that have that genetic weakness. And that's happening across all tumor types. And we're finding that, for example, some leukemias may have the same genetic mistake or mutation that a brain tumor might have, and that opens up a whole new realm of drugs that we never would normally think of treating a brain tumor with something we think of as a leukemia drug. But the Genome Project is revealing those bits of knowledge to us.
It has to be so exciting for you.
It's tremendously exciting, and in my 15 years of caring for children with brain tumors, most of them have really been in the basic research lab, and I directed my own basic research lab where we would really try to understand human brain tumors looking at mouse tissue. But now, in my return to St. Jude, I can bring those 15 years of science, basic science experience, as well as clinical experience, back to the clinical trials, because our knowledge of the genome has so exploded that now it's so complex to understand the pathways causing these tumors to grow. You really need to have some basic science experience to see the nuances of whether the drug is hitting the target, is it working, are we making progress?
Where do you see this going? I mean, the Genome Project, what do you see this opening the door to? A cure for all cancers? All childhood cancers?
Well, I think, we're slowly making progress. I think over the last several decades we've made tremendous progress, because 20 years ago we really didn't have any insight into what mutations cause the tumor cells to grow. Now we're coming to understand that there might be one set of mutation that causes the tumor to become initiated, but then that kind of changes, and then later on that tumor pathway that pathway is not as important, and actually there's an occurrence of another pathway, a second or third pathway that's causing the tumor to grow. So we're finding that the tumors are actually quite complex, and so the mutation or the genetic event that initiated the tumor may be very different than what's causing the tumor to grow now. So the Genome Project helps us understand different steps along the way that might be happening within the tumor cells, and also different modifications. It's not just the genetic code, but maybe some of the things that affect whether a gene is expressed, turned on, or turned off. We're learning that from the Genome Project about specific subsets of tumors.
Maybe this may be an oversimplification, but when a child has cancer, that's just indicative that there's a genetic code gone wrong. There's something wrong with the genetic code every single time?
Yes, most often, and usually it's only in the tumor cells. So the way I explain it to some of my patient families is that it's like when you read a letter or you read a book. If there's a typographical error in that word, you might not understand what the word says. That's what happens in all our bodies, the cells of our bodies, every day. But often those mistakes or those mutations are corrected by our body. But when a mutation in an important gene slips through, that typo gets translated into an incorrect word, which could be an incorrect gene or an activated gene that causes the cells to grow out of control and lose their growth regulation. And most pediatric cancers are caused by that type of spontaneous mutation, because children haven't really lived long enough to usually have acquired enough sun damage or exposure to toxic chemicals to develop other environmentally induced type of cancers.
So it's not as if there's something in the environment triggering the
No.
genetic problem?
Can I get you just to move your mouse real quick? It just went to your screensaver.
Oh.
Sorry. Perfect. All right, sorry.
All right. No problem. Thanks.
Says here that the latest news on the Genome Project has identified potential drug targets for a common childhood brain tumor. Were you involved in that? And discovered mutations tied to aggressive childhood brain tumors. So
Yeah.
a lot in the area of
A number
brain
of
tumors,
those,
which is what
yeah, we're finding that a number of these pediatric cancers actually have a mutation in sort of the spool or the histone, which is the spool that the DNA is wrapped around. When the DNA is packed so very tightly and compactly into each cell, the DNA has to wrap around kind of a spool, like a spool of thread. And we've found that in leukemias and brain tumors and a couple of other tumors, there's actually a mutation that causes that spool to malfunction. We're not sure exactly how, but we're currently growing cells from human brain tumors from resected tissue, and also when tissue becomes available from biopsy, for example. And we're actually studying those cells in the lab to understand what the mutation in that spool does. What does it do to the cell and how the cell functions? We're also using those cells to screen libraries of hundreds of thousands of compounds, of drugs that are available, and new compounds that haven't yet been authorized to be used as drugs. We're looking for leads and hits of those drugs or compounds that can kill the tumor cells, and then we can actually take that information and test it in some animal models, and also then test it in clinical trials. So all of the clinical trials that we're working on right now, that I'm drafting, are directly related to the mutations and findings that we have uncovered from the Human Genome Project.
And all of that's going on right here, under this roof.
A lot of it is going on here. Some of the sequencing and analysis was going on at WashU in St. Louis, and it's also in collaboration with the National Cancer Institute. And another thing I should say is that all the information that we discover here at St. Jude and we disseminate, we publish in scientific papers, we present at meetings, so that children throughout the world are able to benefit from the research and discoveries going on here at St. Jude. So though it might be one child treated here, it has large impact on many, many other children worldwide.
I do think that that is one amazing thing about St. Jude, is that the knowledge that's gained here is not proprietary. I mean,
It's not, no.
St. Jude pushes it out there. Here,
We
use this,
push it
try
out.
this, do this.
Yep,
Yeah.
and we also get, we physicians often get consulted by physicians outside in the community or even international physicians asking advice on their most difficult and challenging patients. And so we often disseminate information even informally about advice that we think how best to treat this child. The physicians outside are also able to send their scans in and their information on the patient and what chemotherapy they've received so far. We are able to confirm the histologic diagnosis, confirm the type of tumor. We're also able to give our recommendations for treatment and which medications would be most helpful. And it's wonderful to be in this type of a setting. And as a physician who practiced medicine at another institution for 10 years, it's such a thrill to be able to come back to St. Jude and see how it's changed, and also just see colleagues and friends again and be part of this wonderful mission.
It has to be so personally fulfilling for you.
It is very fulfilling. And it's also fulfilling. I did some of my training here. I was here for 4 years getting clinical training and then basic science training. And then I went elsewhere, and it was such a thrill to be able to come back. And some of my same patients are still here and still alive. So that's wonderful.
So what does that make you feel like when you run into them? I mean, have you run into
Good. Well, some of them, they go to our survivors clinic, but they sometimes stop by clinic and say hello. It's also fun, I think, because the staff at the hospital, everyone feels very invested in the mission. And one of the maintenance men saw me when I first came back to St. Jude in 2010, and I had been gone then for almost 10 years. And he looked at me and said, "Hey, Doc, I haven't seen you in a while. Have you been out of town?" And I smiled and gave him a hug, and I said, "Yes, I've been out of town." He said, "Well, glad you're back." So it's really quite charming, I think, when the collegiality of the staff and the warmth that we have at every role here at St. Jude, I think, radiates upon the patients and serving the patient families.
I love that he didn't think you aged in 10 years.
Well, I mean, maybe his eyes got a little worse.
That's right. Talk about bench to bedside. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Why is that so unique?
Well, I think it's very important, and I think it's happening at a lot of centers. One of the reasons that St. Jude is so well poised to do bench to bedside is that we have scientists and physicians and nurses and pharmacists all under the same roof. You don't have to travel by subway for a half an hour to get to another campus. I walk over to the next building. We're able to have meetings where the scientists and the staff and the nursing and physician staff can meet together. We talk about problems. We're able to come up with solutions to problems before they even arise in the patient population. We know that certain medicines have to be kept at a specific temperature, and I wouldn't know that as a physician unless the pharmacist said, well, if this family's going to be traveling home to Texas or a warm state, they need to have a refrigerated container. So that knowledge, that working together, that bench to bedside helps us gather all the information to benefit the patient.
But also, is bench to bedside, does that mean when there's a new discovery in the lab upstairs or wherever the lab is, I mean, it can be tried on a child more rapidly, quickly.
More rapidly, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, more rapidly. And also we're able to do very high-level clinical trials. So we're able to sample a child's blood. So when they take their medicine, we're able to sample their blood then 1 hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, 8, and 24 hours after that drug. And we can take a very small, in a few drops of blood, we can determine how much drug is dissolved in their blood, and then we can understand better how rapidly they're metabolizing it, and if we need to change the dose, we can change the dose. And that wouldn't happen if we didn't have the scientific community here supporting the clinical care of these
I
children.
know that St. Jude was the first to, I guess, have this bench to bedside model.
Yeah, St. Jude is really it's the only comprehensive cancer center geared solely to the health of children battling cancer in the whole country. And then also it's the first place to have scientists and physicians all under one roof working in one location for the benefit of the children.
With the children there too.
Yeah, with the children there too. Exactly, yep. The children there
And
too.
tell me the benefits of that.
Well, we're able to, we look at problems with a different perspective. So we're able to bring different perspectives to the problem of pediatric cancer and delivering drugs to an organ like the nervous system, where we need to get the drugs across the blood-brain barrier. So we're able to solve those problems together, talking with the clinicians and talking with the scientists. We're able to then translate that to the care of the children immediately without having to wait for a publication, without me having to read about it in the literature of research done at another center. We're actually doing it here. Also, by speaking with physicians and the scientists together, we can help improve and streamline some of the experiments. We can say, I already know that drug gets into the brain. I already know it crosses the blood-brain barrier, so we don't have to do those experiments. So then it really accelerates the level and the pace of discovery in the lab.